Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I want to welcome you here to the informational session and public hearing on Crimson Holdings. My name is Caitlin DeVries, and I'm from the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy's Environmental Support Division. And I'll primarily be running on the back end of things tonight. But before I pass it over to tonight's moderator, I wanted to cover a couple of quick items. So first, to ensure effective communication for all of tonight's participants, we have a Spanish interpretation available for those who wish to listen in Spanish. In order to do that, you'll want to make sure that you click on the interpretation or the world icon that's at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar and select your preferred language, either English or Spanish. If you're choosing to listen in English, please make sure you also select English so that you can effectively hear all communication tonight and have it be interpreted where necessary. So next, I want to make sure that everyone knows that all lines are going to be muted during the meeting, but we are recording this meeting, and we should have the recording made available probably tomorrow, if not by Friday at the latest. And that will be sent out to all registered participants as well as posted to our website. So with all the housekeeping taken care of, I want to pass it over to tonight's moderator, Jennifer Dixon. Jennifer, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Caitlin. Really appreciate you running through all of the start of the program tonight. I know we have a lot to go over. So one of the first things that we want to talk about before we really get started with kind of the meat of what we're going to be talking about is how things are going to work tonight. And the reason we do this is because there's going to be two sort of separate sections of the evening. The first part of the evening is going to be us doing a very short presentation about what we're here to talk about tonight. After that, we'll get to a time where we'll be able to get questions from the audience and then answer some of those questions, hopefully. And then after that part is over, or at 7 o'clock or 7:30, apologies, whichever comes sooner, we will start the public hearing. And so during the hearing portion of the night, we won't be answering questions. That will be just for you to put your comments on the record. So I'll go over this again once we get to that portion, but I always like to talk about it a little bit in the beginning, just so that people understand there's kind of these two separate portions of the night, the informational session and then the public hearing. So another part of what we want to make sure that you know, a little bit more housekeeping, is how to ask a question or how to make a comment. I mean, this is going to be the same instructions for both. So when we talk about how to ask a question, you can either type your question into the question and answer box at the bottom of your toolbar. Once we get to that question and answer session after the presentation, you will be able to also click that raise hand icon and then raise your hand. We'll be able to help you unmute your line, and then you'll be able to ask your question verbally. So if we do have people that are listening on the phone who have called in and would like to ask a question, that's going to be using the #2 on your phone to be able to ask a question. So again, we'll go over this again later, but I like to just kind of preface it so you are thinking about it and you have it in your head as we go forward. All right, so we have a lot of things to go over tonight, and we are really so happy that so many of you have joined us. It looks like we've got over 40 people participating. That's really great. But there's a couple of things that I just want to go over before we get into the rest of our conversation. So one thing I want to mention is that we are really, really happy to be able to have our Spanish interpreters here, Luis and Anna. So thank you guys so much for being here. We're really thankful for them to be able to help us be a little bit more inclusive of some of the residents in Adrian. I also just want a quick shout out to the Adrian District Library and the Latino leaders for the enhancement. I'm sorry, excuse me, just 1 second. Sorry about that. The Latino leaders for the enhancement of advocacy and development, or LEAD as they like to be called, for helping us broadcast this meeting in English and Spanish at the library. So we're hoping that this will really help community members to be able to listen in person and participate. So before we move on to some of the other parts of the night, I want to introduce the decision maker for these two actions that we're going to be talking about tonight. And we'll explain a little bit more about what those are, but I want to introduce you to Annette Switzer. She's our air quality division director, and she, like I said, will be the decision maker on both of these actions. So Annette, I know you wanted to just kind of welcome people, so you can go ahead and do that whenever you're ready.
Jen, we wanted to say that we really appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight to meet with us, to ask us questions, and to share your thoughts and comments on the proposed air permit and enforcement action. Like Jen said, I'm Annette Switzer, the Air Quality Division Director, and I'm the decision maker for these two air quality related actions. As the decision maker, I'll be listening closely to the conversation tonight so that when the comment period closes, I have the feedback and information I need to thoroughly evaluate what direction these decisions will take. Talking with community members is important to us, and the comments you give often leads to positive changes in our decisions. We know this time of year can be busy for families, so I'll let you get back to the reason that you've joined us tonight. I'll be listening in the rest of the meeting and during the hearing, and I encourage you to ask questions if you have them and submit comments if you'd like to. Thank you all again for being here. Jen, I will pass it back to you so we can get the rest of the conversation started.
Yeah, thanks for that, Annette. Yeah, like Annette said, she will be listening in for the rest of the meeting tonight. So we're really happy to have her here too. I want to introduce to you the rest of the EGLE staff that you're going to be hearing from, just so that you can kind of put a face to a name a little bit and think about the different roles that these staff people play, because in these two actions that we're talking about, the proposed permit and the proposed enforcement action, it's a team of people really that work on these. So if my staff can turn their cameras on, that would be great. One of the main people that you're going to be hearing from, and I'll kind of introduce them in the order that you'll hear from them, besides for me. So the first person you're going to hear from is Scott Miller, and some people may already know him. He is the Jackson District Supervisor. So luckily, thankfully, one of our main inspectors for this facility for Crimson Holdings is actually on maternity leave. So we're really happy for her, but we wished that she could be here tonight. Instead, we've got Scott. So Scott's going to be talking to you a little bit about compliance, complaints, things like that. The next person that we're going to hear from is going to be Malcolm Mead O'Brien, and he is our enforcement staff person. So he's going to be talking to you about the enforcement action, a little bit more details. Then last but certainly not least, as far as presentations go tonight, is Andy Drury, and he is the permit engineer. So these are three people who have worked very, very closely on this project. We have a couple other staff people that are going to be joining us for the panelist portion of the evening, and that's going to be Jim Haywood, and he is our air modeler. So I know that sounds a little strange and you might not know what air modeling is, and that's okay. We're going to talk about it more later. We also have Doreen Lehner on the line, and she is our toxicologist for the permit action. So toxicologists for our air quality division do a lot of work with assessing different air toxics, and especially during the permit process, they're really instrumental. I would be remiss if I didn't also thank Caitlin and Jim Ostrowski for their help on the back end of this meeting. So a lot of people worked to bring this to you. So we really hope it's a productive meeting tonight. So we're going to get into that kind of presentation portion of the night. So Andy, if you want to leave your camera on, and anybody else, that you guys can turn your cameras off for now if you want to. But because we're going to be bringing these two separate but related actions to you today, what we want to do is, oh, sorry about that. That always happens to me in this part. I apologize. We want to give you a little bit of the background, and that's what Scott's going to be talking about. And then we'll move into those brief descriptions of the proposed actions and how you can participate in the process. So for those of you that registered to attend the meeting ahead of time and provided questions, thank you so much. That was very helpful. So as we were preparing to come talk to you, we tried to include information to answer many of those questions in our presentation. So for instance, we knew that there's a lot of different court cases and enforcement type actions related to Crimson Holdings right now in Adrian. The one that we're going to be talking with you about is different from the ones the city may have and things like that. So we have different limitations for what we do, and we have a different authority. So I know that can sometimes be confusing, so please feel free to ask questions when we get to that part. We will talk more about that later for sure, but I wanted to mention it now just because I know that was definitely a source of confusion. Like we mentioned earlier, if you have questions about the proposed permit or the enforcement action, you can type them into the question and answer box anytime. Once we're done with the presentations, we'll get to that question and answer session. Then once we get to that, again, either at 7:30 or when you guys are done asking questions, whatever comes first, we'll move into that hearing portion. That hearing portion will be where we don't respond to any questions back to you. It's just to put comments on the record. So after the hearing, we'll quickly go through how you can submit an official comment if you didn't want to tonight. Tonight is not the only time to submit a comment. Many people are not prepared to do that on the night of the hearing, and that's completely fine. We'll also talk to you about where you can find other information if you're interested in learning more. And we'll talk to you about how you can get a hold of us if you want to. So a little bit just about air quality division in general before we move forward here is our staff use state and federal regulations in our mission to protect human health and the environment. So we do this by regulating industrial sources like Crimson Holdings. We know that there's a lot of things air quality related and other concerns for Adrian residents right now. But tonight we are trying to focus on how our inspectors, our permit engineers, and our enforcement staff work together with other air quality division staff to conduct those inspections, respond to complaints, write violations when warranted. And we're going to be talking about how these important activities may lead to the need for an air permit or escalated enforcement like we're talking about tonight. So without further ado, I know you are probably tired already of hearing from me. I am going to pass the microphone over to Scott Miller so that he can give us a little bit of a background on the work our air quality inspectors do and then why the company is requesting this permit. So Scott, whenever you're ready, go right ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good evening, everybody. Many of you I have had met before, and I'm glad that you were able to join us tonight. And all of you, I'm happy you're here. The Air Quality Division district offices are responsible for evaluating compliance with permit conditions, state and federal regulations. The Jackson District covers 5 counties in south central Michigan, including Lenawee County. Our staff are responsible for hundreds of regulated facilities in these 5 counties. District staff conduct scheduled inspections and inspections in response to complaints like odor complaints. State, federal, and permit requirements vary depending on the type of facility, their production process, and their air emissions. Crimson Holdings is required to comply with all of their permit conditions, and we evaluate compliance through on-site inspections and review of any required records and reports. The primary focus of the permit requirements at Crimson Holdings is the control of odors. The permit contains limits for particulate and VOC emissions, which are emitted from the main dryer stack. But ultimately, the effectiveness of the air control systems and process controls will be based on whether odors are being controlled in compliance with the state's nuisance odor requirements. In the case of Crimson Holdings, and in response to community concerns and complaints, we conducted numerous inspections over the past year and a half, and we documented numerous violations of state rules, primarily our nuisance odor rule. If violations are found, a notice is sent to the facility. A violation notice can sometimes result in enforcement action or changes to a permit. For Crimson Holdings, the violations observed fall within 3 categories. These violations will be addressed by issuance of this permit and consent order. Malcolm will be discussing the consent order in more detail. Following the issuance of the new permit and consent order, we will continue to make sure the company stays in compliance with these conditions by conducting future inspections, complaint investigations, records review, and stack tests if needed. At this point, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Malcolm to talk about the enforcement process.
Good evening, I'm Malcolm and I work in the enforcement unit of the Air Quality Division. I'm going to speak briefly about the enforcement process. The enforcement process works to resolve cited violations and discourage future violations. We do this through an administrative consent order. A consent order is a legal contract between 2 willing or consenting parties written as a legal order. The proposed consent order we're sharing with you tonight is between the Air Quality Division and Crimson Holdings. It contains legally enforceable commitments, a compliance program which Crimson must follow, which includes permit terms and nuisance odor controls, a fine, and stipulated fines that would apply if future violations occur. This slide represents the enforcement process as a sequence of steps. First, when our staff conduct an inspection, as Scott just mentioned, it may lead to a finding of violation, and the consequence of that may be issuance of a violation notice. In turn, this may result in Air Quality Division issuing an enforcement notice, and the enforcement notice convenes enforcement meetings to establish an enforceable corrective action program. Once we agree on the proposed compliance program and resolution, we share the proposed resolution with the public during a public comment period and hearing, which is what we're doing tonight. After the public comment period and hearing, the Air Quality Division will review the comments received and make a decision on the proposed terms. The compliance plan that we have for you tonight to review has 3 major components. Crimson must obtain a permit to install and operate a packed bed scrubber, which Crimson proposed as a way to control odorous emissions from the dryer. The consent order requires Crimson to comply with Rule 901, which is our nuisance odor standard, and it requires that they not emit objectionable odors that cause unreasonable interference with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property. And third, we have Crimson must implement a nuisance minimization plan for odors. So the nuisance minimization plan for odors contains a number of items and really works from the beginning of the process through the end of their product that they create. The first item I want to touch upon is monitoring, that it requires monitoring the quality of the liquid egg and control of the temperature and hold time. It requires management of the upgraded wastewater system that they've implemented, which has increased sludge removal schedule, cleaning schedule, and activated carbon control, as well as enhanced housekeeping. And they've implemented facility checklists and quality controls. Additionally, the facility has an egg spray drying process, and they're required to monitor the drying baghouse pressure drop, the inspections of the dryer to ensure that it's working properly. For the packed bed scrubber, The company will be required to install, operate, and maintain the scrubber in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications and the terms of the air use permit. The company also has committed to conducting scheduled odor surveys and evaluate and address complaints. The settlement terms of the consent order include a fine, which has been calculated to $106,180. In order to make this calculation, we followed state law and federal penalty policy and considered which considers several factors. The federal policy is the Federal Clean Air Act civil penalty policy, and the state statute is Part 55, or the Air Pollution Control Regulations, under the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Together, the federal policy and the state statute direct how settlement calculations are determined and include such items as the number of cited violations and their duration, the importance of achieving compliance goals, rules, and requirements, the size of the company, and the company's cooperation in implementing corrective action. The next term of the that we'd like to discuss tonight has to do with the air use permit, which is a standalone compliance tool, as well as enforceable under the consent order. To do this discussion, I'd like to introduce Andy, our permit engineer, to speak about the air use permit.
Thank you, Malcolm. I'm going to talk about air permitting in general first, and then talk about Crimson Holdings. The Air Quality Division has the authority to permit sources of air pollutants. However, I want to point out a few items that air permits do not cover and that we do not have the ability to regulate. You will want to talk to your local government if you have questions or concerns about issues such as zoning, noise, and traffic. So what is a permit to install? Often referred to as an air permit. To get an air permit, a company submits an application that lists the rules and regulations that apply to the project and how the company plans to meet those requirements. We, the Air Quality Division staff, we evaluate the application to see if it looks like the project can meet the rules and regulations. If so, we follow the process to issue the permit. The issued permit to install is not permission for a facility to do anything it wants to. It's quite the opposite. It is basically a list of requirements the company must comply with, that they have to meet to comply with the air quality rules and regulations. It is important to note that we legally must base our decision to approve or deny a permit application on whether or not the proposed project meets the current air rules and regulations. I'd like to give an overview of the steps taken to get a proposed draft permit ready for public comment. First, a company decides they would like to install, modify, or construct a piece of equipment. Then the company submits a permit application to the AQD. We, the AQD staff, review the application the company submitted as it relates to the state and federal air quality rules and regulations. If the project appears to meet the rules and regulations, we create a proposed draft permit. Once the company has reviewed the draft permit, it is posted for public comment. Public comment is a very important part of the permitting process. Anyone can comment on a proposed permit, including the company. Once the comment period ends, we evaluate all the comments received, and these comments can affect the permitting decision. Finally, we make a decision on the permit. The decision may be to approve the permit as written, approve the permit with changes, or to deny the permit. This decision is based on the ability of the company's proposal to meet the air regulations. So why did Crimson Holdings apply for this permit? In 2006, Dairy Farmers of America Incorporated was issued an air permit for production of powdered milk. The facility was later purchased by Crimson Holdings to produce powdered eggs. During an inspection, we determined that the switch from powdered milk production to powdered egg production requires a modification to the air permit. In addition, the production of powdered eggs has resulted in nuisance odors that violate AQD Rule 901. The need for a permit modification and the odors led to enforcement action. Crimson Holdings submitted the permit application as part of the enforcement action. The Crimson Holdings permit application is for the production of powdered eggs, to make installation of a packed bed scrubber on the egg spray dryer enforceable, and to make the nuisance minimization plan for odors enforceable. The packed bed scrubber will reduce odor-causing emissions from the spray dryer. So what is a packed bed scrubber? A packed bed scrubber is an air cleaning device that uses a liquid to remove contaminants from a gas. The gas enters the bottom of the scrubber and goes up. The liquid enters the top of the scrubber and goes down. The scrubber uses a packing to increase contact between the liquid and gas so more contaminants are removed. The cleaned gas exits the top of the scrubber through a mist eliminator that keeps liquid from leaving with the cleaned gas. The liquid leaves the bottom of the scrubber. Crimson Holdings scrubber will remove compounds that can cause odors from the spray dryer exhaust. It will have two stages, one using an acid and one using a base, and the removal efficiency is expected to be from 77% to more than 99%, depending on the specific compound. As required by Michigan rules, we compared the expected toxic air contaminant emissions from the scrubber exhaust to our screening levels, which are set at levels to protect public health. While most of our screening levels are for individual pollutants, for Crimson Holdings, we were able to evaluate many of the toxic air contaminants together. We determined that the potential air impacts of the proposed emissions will comply with our health-based screening levels. The potential air impacts were determined using modeling. So what is modeling? We use computer modeling to predict the pollutant concentrations neighbors could be exposed to under the worst case scenarios. By worst case, we mean the maximum emission rates and the weather conditions that don't disperse the emissions. The modeling simulates a grid of virtual air monitors surrounding the facility so we can evaluate the highest concentrations. Modeling was also done for particulate matter less than 10 microns called PM10, particulate matter less than 10.5 microns called PM2.5, and the toxic air contaminants I already talked about. And like the toxic air contaminants, the PM10 and PM2.5 emissions comply with the rules and regulations. The modeling is described in more detail in the air permit technical fact sheet. The proposed permit has several requirements. It has emission limits for particulate matter, PM10, PM2.5, and volatile organic compounds. It requires the existing spray dryer filter to be used and requires the scrubber to be installed by December 22nd, 2023. To ensure the filter is operating properly, Crimson Holdings is required to monitor and record the pressure drop. To ensure the scrubber is operating properly, Crimson Holdings is required to monitor and record the pH of each stage and the liquid flow rates. We can also require emission testing of the spray dryer. And the permit requires Crimson Holdings to implement and maintain a nuisance minimization plan for odors for the entire facility, not just the spray dryer. And we will now have a panel of AQD staff to answer any questions you may have about the proposed draft permit and consent order.
Yeah, thanks, Andy and Malcolm and Scott. Appreciate all the information that you guys just gave. I know it was probably a lot for folks listening in. I would ask now if my panelists could turn their cameras on. That would be great. we'll see if we have any questions. Because we do have folks at the library, I just want to make sure we give ample time for some of those questions to be either typed into that question and answer box if you'd like to. You also remember have the ability to use that raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to do that to ask your question verbally. Or if you are listening on the phone, I'm going to just double check. I don't think we have anybody on the phone today. No, we don't right now, but if we did have folks on the phone, they could also use that pound to raise their hand. All right, so we did get a this is more of a comment, but I think I want Andy you to speak to this a little bit. So the comment was, I want the odor to stop. 77% isn't good enough. So that's talking about how that scrubber is used to remove specific contaminants from the gas stream. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit more about the kinds of things that are going to be removed and maybe why there is a difference in that removal rate.
Yeah, the removal rate depends on the chemistry between the compound being emitted and the acid or base that are used in the scrubber. The range depends on the compounds, and then these are the guaranteed rates for the scrubber, and we would hope the scrubber will be more efficient than that. Part of the challenge with the odors is it's not just a single compound, it's a mixture. And so it's hard to predict what's going to happen. But as we remove more of the compounds, the odor will get less. And then the dispersion modeling has shown that will hopefully be better than what it currently is. We expect it's going to. We know the scrubber will reduce the emissions. And so we'll have to see what happens in real life. But we expect the scrubber is going to provide very good control for the emissions and for the odorous compounds. And largely it's the mix of compounds that really smells. And so even if we don't take them all out, if we get a lot of them out or most of them out, the odor should be very, very minimized.
Yeah, thanks for talking about that, Andy. And one other thing to kind of add on to that is we still will have the ability to conduct an inspection whenever necessary. We still hope that folks that are experiencing odors at levels that are disturbing their way of life will give Scott and his staff a call. We're more than happy to respond to those and do additional investigations. And like we talked about in the beginning, if we do these additional investigations, if they're needed, and we write a violation notice, we won't hesitate to do that if necessary. I mean, we still are keeping an eye on all of this, and we want to make sure that we're on top of things. There was a question in here that I know you just talked about, Andy, but I want to make sure that maybe we can talk a little bit more about what the timeline looks like. So you mentioned that the scrubber would be required to be installed by December 22nd, 2023. So that's actually in just a couple of weeks. So I don't know if you have a little bit more information about the installation and operation, how that might work. And then I don't know if Scott, you might have something to add, but I'm going to pass it over to you first, Andy.
Yes, they are working on installing the scrubber. We've had information from the company that they're in the process of doing that, and they anticipate it will be operating before the 22nd of December. And it may take a few days to tune it and fine tune the pHs and the flow rates and to get it dialed in so it works correctly. But they are right now in the process of installing it.
And Scott, I just want to make sure you do have anything to add to that.
Yeah, and so I think it's important for people to know that the new scrubber will have its own stack. It's not going to be the current stack, the tall stack that's out there. It's going to be a new stack. And Andy, I'm not sure if the company is proposing to take down that current stack or not in the future, but people will see a new stack, and the majority of the emissions from the drying process are going to be going through. All of the emissions from the drying process are going through the scrubber and into a new stack.
Andy, I just want to make sure you didn't have anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I don't know if they're taking the stack down or not. I think they may be, but
and we can find that out too. If we don't know tonight, that's okay. We can definitely find that out if people are interested. There's a couple modeling questions. So Jim, I'm gonna pass these over to you. So one of them is kind of like a comment in a way, and it's true. So a person mentioned the weather plays a huge role in whether or not the odors are really strong. Horrific was the word that was used in the description. So I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit about how weather impacts how the pollutants are dispersed. We talked a little bit about that. And then kind of combined with that, there was a question about our model and how we look at those worst case scenarios, because we want to make sure even at the worst case, they can still pass our air quality rules and regulations. So they mentioned that the modeling was based on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get to the second part of that question, but I'd like to have you talk a little bit about that if you don't mind.
Okay, sure, I'll be glad to. First off, the meteorology, what we do is try to get the most representative meteorological data in the area. And that comes from the National Weather Service there at your airport. That is recorded hourly. And what we do just to make sure that we can look at every conceivable meteorological condition out there, we use 5 years worth of hourly met data. I get information from Andy and the permit group, whatever pollutants that we want to look at, the concentrations that will be coming out of the stack or anywhere on the facility. And we plug other things in, such as we build a 3-dimensional building there, because as the air currents float around the building there, it will disturb what comes out of the stack. And we want to make sure that we take advantage of being able to look at that. So we put that into the model, again, knowing what the emissions are going to be. And as Andy mentioned, there are going to be the worst case emissions. This assumes that they are emitting the maximum amount that's in their permit all the time, never stops. And we do that continuously for 5 years. And then we take a look at that. We look at what the impacts will be to the air. And again, I use the term virtual monitor. Internally, we call those receptors, but the easiest way to understand that is to pretend that we have thousands of virtual monitors out there, pretty much one in every yard that's out there. We look at all of those in the community, and we look at where the worst case impact will be, the highest impact will be, and that drives our study right there. Just that one virtual monitor, that's the worst case monitor. That impact at that monitor has to meet all the federal and state regulatory thresholds for health. If it doesn't do that, then we have to go back to the drawing board and we tell the company, you're emitting too much, or you have to find a different way to emit that, either through more controls or a higher stack or something like that. But at the end of the day, before I can sign off on that, it has to pass every virtual monitor that we put out there in the town. And it did in this case. In fact, for the particulates that we looked at for the PM10 and the PM2.5, the numbers were very, very low. In fact, they were under what we call the significance level. And that is something that EPA gives to us that says if your impacts are below this level, those impacts are so low that we consider it could never cause or contribute to a violation. And in this case, that's what we have for both PM10 and PM2.5. So Jennifer, help me. I don't know.
I think yeah, you did. But there's a little bit more added on to this. Okay. So the sort of next question related to this is, do we have a map of what we looked at for impact areas? And I know we don't have it right now for this presentation, but we can definitely share that. But I just wanted to mention that that was a question. So great question. Go ahead, Jim. Did you want to add? I saw your lips moving.
Yeah, that's very easy to do. The models that we use are very high tech. They're written by EPA and they're given to us, and they're updated every year just to make sure that they're current. So not only do they give us the numbers, which are very important when you're comparing that to a threshold, but we're able to plot that out. If you want to look at a graph of contours of the various impact levels, we can do that very easily. I don't think that was put together. We didn't do that for the information sheet, but that's obviously something that I can do very easily after the fact.
Yeah, no, I think we'll talk about how we can share that, but usually after these meetings, we'll send a follow-up email out, and maybe we can include it with that. That might be helpful, or we can certainly give it directly to the folks that asked for it. So that, but either way, we'll definitely figure out how to get that to you. So I'm going to let you pause for now, take a little breather, get a drink of water. This one goes back to you, Andy, but it is an add-on to what we've just been talking about. So because we modeled that worst case scenario, like Jim just talked about, the question was, does this reflect the actual operation of the facility? So I don't know if you can speak to whether there are any hour restrictions, operational restrictions in the permit. This would be outside of anything that the city would be restricting through their own mechanism. So is there anything in the permit that would restrict those hours of operation?
No, the modeling, the permit review is based on Crimson Holdings operating continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So that's what our evaluation is based on.
Okay, so thank you for that. So I do have, and this is to my Spanish interpreters, Ana and Luis, we do have a question in Spanish, and although I can probably read it in Spanish, I can't interpret it in Spanish. So I was hoping that one of you would be able to read that question. I don't know if you can do that for us or not. So I just wanted to put it out there that there is one in Spanish, and if you can let me know if you can. Yeah, yes, from Lisbeth, yeah. That would be lovely. Perfect. Thank you so much. That's great. So Scott, can you talk a little bit about, I think how we might want to think about this is like, how do we, because we're obviously here in a regulatory role. So how do we, what are our expectations when we're going out doing inspections, your relationship, with regulating the company? We don't have requirements that the company has to be transparent with the community. However, we as a government agency have a lot of information out on the line. We have a website for this facility where we post all the inspection reports, all the stack tests, all the violation notices, all the permits. So a lot of the work that we're doing to regulate this company is available online, and we're happy to share that. We'll share that website later. But Scott, can you just talk a little bit about your role there?
Yep. So in the spring of 2022 is when we started receiving complaints about odors from Crimson Holdings. And from that time until the present, we have been on site, probably dozens of site visits. And during those site visits, we most of the time interact with the facility. We also take time to meet with complainants and talk to them. And so this has been a very resource intensive effort. Our staff are out there a lot. We're talking with the facility all the time. And the facility has met with us as Air Quality Division on numerous occasions. They've met with Andy and Malcolm and Jim and I and many others. And so the process has kind of gone on over time. It's required a lot of different staff involvement. And so that, I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the crux of this is that if we are doing a complaint investigation and we get a complaint, if we need to do an inspection, they're required to let us do that work. It's not that they're saying, no, you can't come in, but that is part of our role. Our job is to regulate them. Our job is to ensure that they're following the rules and regulations. So
right.
It's a kind of an interesting relationship. I think it's different than, some other things that you might be normally used to dealing with. So I think you addressed it pretty well there,
Yep,
Scott.
and the facility has been cooperative from that perspective. In all of the visits that we've had on site, they have allowed us complete access to the facility, and we've conducted numerous inspections within the facility as well as outside and in the community.
So we're going to shift gears again. Thank you for that. I'm going to be sending this question to you, Malcolm. The question was, can you talk a little bit more about how the penalty was calculated? You kind of laid it out there, the things that we take, into consideration, but I thought maybe you could talk a little bit more about how that is actually done.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So our penalty calculation, just to recap it broadly, was based upon both the state policy, state statute, and the federal Clean Air Act civil penalty policy. The two components add up to the amount that we calculated. For the state violation, the federal violations, we looked at our Rule 201, that a company needs to obtain a permit to install for all of what they're doing. And they had a slight modification that they quickly corrected, that we identified there was a stack that was inverted. So that was during our very first inspection back in 2022. That was quickly corrected. We did a calculation under the federal policy for Rule 201, and that number came up at 36,000 and some odd change. For the state violations, Rule 901, the nuisance standard, is a state-only violation. It is not incorporated from the Federal Clean Air Act. And so that falls squarely under our state statute, and the calculation we used was the maximum amount possible, which is 10,000 per violation. In this case, we took each of the violation notices that we issued upon verifying that there was a violation of that standard, and for which we issued a violation notice. There were 7 notices. We multiplied that by 10,000 times 7, and we got 70,000. So those two components added up to the 106,180 that we came up with.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that, Malcolm. I know it's kind of an involved process. If you want more information about that, like I mentioned in the beginning, we will be letting you know how you can talk to Malcolm or any of the other staff if you want to dig a little bit deeper in some of these questions. The next question that I want to talk about is, have any health issues been documented as a result of the poor air quality on the east side of Adrian? So EGLE, although our rules and regulations are designed to be protective of human health and the environment, the State Department of Health and Human Services is the one that kind of deals more with specific health issues, and wanted to, because we can't maybe address specific health related questions right now, but I did want to let folks know that from the beginning, when Scott mentioned a year and a half ago or so, when we really started getting complaints, when this process changed, we started talking with our state health department and the county health department as well, just because we wanted them to know that we were getting a lot of complaints, we were getting a lot of concerns that people were having impacts to their health, to their quality of life from the odors that they were experiencing from this egg drying process. And the important thing to note there is, like I said, we're not the health organization, but we've talked a lot with our state health department about this. And one of the things that they always talk about is that even though these odors, you might hear them termed as nuisance odors, we understand that for people living in this community, this is not only a nuisance. This is something that's very serious, that's very frustrating, that impacts their life sometimes on a daily basis, especially like we talked about when those weather conditions are a certain way. Odors, although they might not cause you long-term health effects, our health department has talked a lot in other meetings with us about how they can have headaches, things like that. So if you're experiencing those things, we do want you to let us know. You can also reach out to the health department. That's also perfectly acceptable. They're more than willing to talk to you about those things. But those are the occasions when we want you to let us know that you're experiencing problems. Another thing related to that is we know that calling us, filling out the online complaint form can become tedious. It can be frustrating to feel like you're doing this, and nothing seems to be happening. We acknowledge that the process that we go through, why we're here tonight, it can take a long time. It can take a lot longer than people that are living in these situations want. We do our best to move as fast as we can. I know Scott mentioned several times that we've been, responding to complaint investigations. We will continue to do that. The stack that the company put on was not the best solution. We're really feeling like this scrubber is the way to go right now. I know we had a question about how does the scrubber remove pollutants, so we're going to get to that next. But I wanted to talk a little bit about those health concerns because we know that those are very real and very valid concerns when it comes to experiencing odors like this. So appreciate that comment, that concern, that question. So moving to the, how will the new equipment stop the smell? You talked a little bit about that, Andy, and I'm happy to go back to that diagram. I think seeing kind of how the scrubber works with, this comes in here and this comes in here. And it kind of is, you think about it, like it scrubs the pollutants out of the gas stream. So the exhaust goes in there and it literally does. It's kind of scrubs it out. It holds on to them and it doesn't let them escape out into the air. So I've very simplified that. Can you talk about it a little bit more intelligently and technically? But that's how I visualize it in my head, is like I'm doing the dishes and all that stuff is getting stuck on the sponge. So
Yeah, so scrubbers are not new or novel. They've been around for a long time. I've permitted more of them than I can count in my time doing permits. So it's not something new and novel that we don't know about. Scrubbers are often used for controls of various things. And that dishes washing analogy is actually pretty good, because what it does is that air flows through that scrubber with the water in it, and it washes the stinky chemicals out of the air. And because of the wide variety of smelly things that come out of the dryer, they are using one section with sulfuric acid that's going to react with things like ammonia and other similar chemicals to scrub those out of the water, and a section using sodium hydroxide, which will react with things like sulfides and other compounds like that and wash those out of the air. So essentially that's what it's doing. It's washing the air that comes off the dryer. I will point out that the dryer is not the only source of odors at the facility, which is why the odor plan is not just for the dryer, it's for the entire facility. And they have taken steps for other portions of the process, like the wastewater treatment, which is exempt from permitting. It does not need a permit according to our rules, but they've taken steps to reduce odors from that as well. And other parts of it, which I'm not as familiar with because it's not part of the permit. But yeah, they've got, one is the scrubber, which will wash the air. That's essentially what it does. And then the odor plan, which they've implemented a lot of those things already. So that's how
yeah,
it's
no, thank you for that. So I was just thinking when you were talking about that it is important to note to everybody who's listening with us tonight that when we're getting a little closer to the comment period, the hearing section of the night, and all of these things are open for comment. So the permit that Andy's been talking about is open for comment. The consent order that Malcolm talked about is open for comment, but also the nuisance minimization plan for odors, which is a very long way to say the odor plan is how I think of it. That is also open for comment. So again, this is why we want to make sure that you don't feel like you have to have comment tonight. If this is a lot of new information for you, that you can take some time to look at that and provide feedback. So it's really important just to note that is also open for comment, because people sometimes tend to forget that. I want
Yeah,
to
and-
acknowledge, oh, sorry, go ahead,
Yeah,
Andy.
but I was gonna say, Jen, we're recording this, so people can go
Yes.
back and watch this again.
Yep.
And our contact information is there, so if they have further questions, they can contact us
Yep.
directly.
Yeah, and interesting, you know, a lot of times people feel maybe awkward or like, I don't know if I should reach out to them. No, please do reach out to us. We would love to talk to you about any questions that you have. We want to try to help you understand what this all means. And we know that these meetings sometimes are not the best place to really dig as deep as you want to. I want to acknowledge a couple comments that have been kind of coming into the question box, and the person mentioning them has said, this isn't a question, this is a comment, but I want to acknowledge that the frustration about the continuing odors is definitely there. There's thoughts in here about the smell after certain times of day, after working hours, which can be frustrating for people too. And so just again, want to encourage people to let us know when that's happening, and encourage you to reach out to us. If you want us to reach out to you, go ahead and put your contact information in that question box, and we're happy to do that first. I know, like I said, it can kind of be a little bit uncomfortable for folks. There's one more question in here that I think that we talked about, but I want to maybe talk about it just a little bit more, because I don't want people coming away from this thinking that this is the be all end all. This is what EGLE's doing. They're going to get a new permit. They're going to do this scrubber, and then we're walking away from this, or this is the end of it. So the question was like, if this doesn't work, then what happens? That's a really great question. We mentioned earlier that we've got, you know, Scott and his group, they're kind of the first line of defense on establishing whether or not this works. Their job, once a permit is issued, if it's issued, will be to really make sure that the company is following all the conditions in that permit, responding to any complaints, listening to when you let us know that you're having issues. So I think another thing that I would like to be able to commit to doing through this process is, I know Andy talked about December 22nd is the date that the scrubber will be installed, and that kind of thing. But what we would like to do is, I don't know, probably there's people on the line that get emails from me, Jennifer Dixon, apologies if they're too much, but we're trying to communicate with you all as much as possible. And anyone who wasn't on that list before and is at this meeting, you will be added to that email list, because we want to make sure that you know. But we'll also commit to letting you know when that scrubber is up. Hopefully you notice a big difference. That would be wonderful. We'd love to hear that feedback as well. But so that was kind of our last question that we had in the chat, which is great timing actually, because it is 7:29. So I think we can move over to the hearing portion of the night. And
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Jen.
yeah, go ahead,
the-
Andy.
The scrubber has to be installed by the 22nd, and that gives 2 weeks before the comment period is over.
Yep.
So if it doesn't work, let us know.
Yep.
Send in the
That's-
comments, let us know.
That's a great add-on. Yeah. And I think we'll talk a little bit about comments in a minute, just in general, but yeah, that's a great thing to be able to add to things too. All right. Yes. So I know, again, I just want to thank, so Bob and Lisbeth, thank you guys very much for doing the broadcast at the library and managing that. Really appreciate you guys' help. Panelists, you guys can go ahead and turn your cameras off. I'm going to ask Annette to turn hers on, because we're going to move over to this hearing portion of the night here. I want to go over, so the way the hearing portion works is, this is the time of night where we will take your comments. A lot of times people ask questions in the comments, but we just won't respond to them. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. And then we want to talk, before I have to read this kind of dry opening statement to you, I want to talk just a little bit about commenting. And you may wonder, what should I be commenting about? And we've talked a little bit about some things during the night tonight, but I just want to reiterate that we do welcome comments of any type. You can comment on you know, all the things that we've chatted about tonight. But comments that are related to how the permit or the consent order or the nuisance minimization plan for odors were written, what regulations are included, how those conditions and things are set up in those documents, those are going to have the greatest impact on the outcome of the actions and what the final decision is. So comments about the specific changes are going to be more effective. So for example, if you say fix all the typos, hopefully we don't have any, but that's just for an example. That's not going to be as effective of a comment as saying like you didn't put a comma here or something like that. And I know I very simplified that, but I just want to give you an example. Comments that are outside the scope of the proposals can't lead to changes in the final permit if approved or in the final consent order. So we can't take into consideration whether Adrian as a community is in support or opposition to either of these actions, and we can't make changes that are outside of our authority, like Andy talked about in the beginning, noise, traffic, zoning, things like that. So just a quick reminder too, after the hearing portion, I will go over how you can find additional information, how you can get a hold of us and that kind of stuff. So feel free to stick around for that if you don't mind. Just want to let you guys know that I have some more things in Spanish and I'm trying to interpret in my head and I'm not a Spanish speaker. So I just want to put that out there. Okay. Yes. Yep. Thank you for that. So there is, actually, I'm going to have you do this, Luis. Do you mind, or Louis, if you don't mind, I don't want to mess it up. I think I got it, but I don't want to mess it up before we move on. Elizabeth has put a little bit more in Spanish in the question box. And I just want to make sure that I don't mess it up. Do you mind translating that for me or interpreting that for me? Oh. Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you, Anna. Appreciate that. Yeah, of course. Oh, go ahead. Yes, it is. You guys have a challenging job. So thank you for all of that, Elizabeth. We appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the hearing. So to do the hearing, I do have a very dry statement that I have to read to all of you to officially start it. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Jennifer Dixon. I am with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, and I will be the hearing officer tonight. Annette Switzer, Air Quality Division Director, is the decision maker for the permit application and the enforcement action before you this evening. She will be listening to your comments and considering all of them prior to making a decision. This hearing is being held to take comments on a proposed administrative consent order and a proposed air permit at Crimson Holdings, LLC, located at 1336 East Maumee Street in Adrian, Michigan. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on public health and the environment. The law governing those responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Before the company can make the requested changes, they must obtain a permit that meets the requirements of Michigan's air quality laws. Oh, Caitlin, did it mess up again? Sorry for that. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Okay, the proposed permit must also contain conditions that include emission limits and specific ways of operating the equipment to ensure these standards are met. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to give anyone interested in the proposed permit and or the proposed consent order an opportunity to provide information we can use in deciding whether to approve the permit and or enter into the consent order, or if there are additional issues to consider. Please note that both the proposed consent order and the proposed permit are in draft form. This does not mean the department has already made a decision. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposed permit, and it reflects an initial agreement in which Crimson Holding must pay a monetary penalty and agree to pay additional penalties if compliance is not maintained. We hope having the details of the draft permit available will help you in providing comments. Everything remains open for comment and further consideration by the department, including whether the permit will be granted or the proposed consent order will be entered into. Please recognize the department can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria we can use in making a decision. For example, concerns related to local zoning, traffic, and noise are not within our authority. Some of you may want to simply express your support or opposition. We are happy to make note of your position, but please understand the department is, by law, not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the two actions. This hearing is being recorded, and your comments will be part of the information the department will consider in making its decision. The public comment period began November 6th and will end at midnight on January 8th, 2024. Additional comments or information may be submitted through that time via written or verbal comment during this hearing, by email, or by voicemail. After the close of the public comment period, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point final decisions will be made by the decision maker. The decision maker may deny the actions, approve as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions, if any, have been changed and the reasons for the change. In all three of these scenarios, all interested parties, including everyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended the public hearing, will be directly notified of the decision. Included in the mailing will be a letter from the decision maker regarding that decision. You may submit a comment at any time during the comment period by US post or email, or you may call in a comment to the public comment voicemail. To make a comment tonight, you may raise your hand and I will unmute your line so you can speak. We will limit your comment time to 3 minutes. If you are speaking, I will let you know when you have about 30 seconds left. So please recognize that the department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed project and to listen to those comments. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will now begin calling the names of those who have indicated they would like to make a statement. Okay, and apologies for that. I don't want to necessarily share that boring document with all of you, but it looks like I did anyways. So that happened last time too, so we'll have to figure out why that's happening. So, all right. I had a couple people who had asked to make comments prior to the actual meeting tonight when they registered. So I want to make sure that we get to those two folks first. And then we'll get to anyone else who would like to. I want to make sure that they're on the line today. So the first person was Kimberly McGraw. So Kimberly, if you want to make a comment, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, you don't have to, no pressure, but I wanted to make sure we give you an opportunity to do that if you would like to. So you can use that raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen if you'd like. I'll give you just another second here to see if you want to or not. Like I said, no pressure, definitely. All right, that's awesome. Okay, all right, hold on 1 second and I'll go ahead and unmute you, or actually I'll have Caitlin unmute you if you don't mind. Caitlin, can you go ahead and unmute Kimberly? So Kimberly, if you don't mind just stating your name for the record and any affiliation you have, and then you can go ahead and start your comment whenever you're ready.
My name is Kimberly McGraw, and I am a resident probably within a 1 block radius of the factory. And I'm just appalled that the length of time that this has been going on. There have been numerous days that like family members have come over and wanted to have cookouts, and the stench is so bad that you have to hibernate inside your house. You know, my daughter-in-law was pregnant when this first happened and she vomited in the yard because it smelled so bad. This has just affected my life. I've lived in my house since 2002. If there, this might not even be the place to do this, but I mean, I feel like it has decreased the value of my home. Nobody wants to live in this neighborhood because of the stench. There's a business across the street from me and they have to leave their doors open the entire time that they're working because it's a automobile shop. And I can't imagine having to be outside in this 8 hours a day when just walking from the car into the house, the stench, it has improved. I will give them that. It has improved, but it's still very pungent and it's still very strong. Like I mentioned earlier, on the days that, you know, the clouds are low or whatever. I mean, it's like they did this and it didn't change, and they did this and it didn't change. And, you know, they're proposing, but this is years. This isn't just a couple weeks that it's smelt bad. This is years that it's been very detrimental on my life and purposefully. And I feel like it's purposefully. You guys, not you guys, somebody cut their operation hours down from like 6P to 6A. I walk outside at 7 o'clock in the morning and I can still smell it. So it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And it's just very frustrating. And I had made a comment earlier that EGLE comes around, but they don't come around after hours when people are home from work. They come around during the daytime. And so they don't get to talk to all the residents and how it's affected their lives. And it's just frustrating. So this is the very first opportunity that I've had to voice my opinion other than emails when it first happened to the Crimson people electively to them, not to you guys. This was before you guys got involved, but it's just frustrating and it just needs to change. I don't want to spend another summer locked inside my house because it's so horrific outside. And that's all. I'm sorry.
No, don't. Thank you for your comment. Don't feel like you have to apologize. We appreciate your comment. The one other person that we had on the list was Kathleen Ramirez, and I don't see that she's on, but if she's listening in with someone else or something like that, please feel free to go ahead and raise your hand using that raise hand icon, and we'll be happy to unmute you and have you be able to give your comment. If anybody else has a comment that they'd like to make, now is your opportunity to do it at the hearing. Like I said, you don't have to submit a comment tonight. There's definitely time and other ways to be able to do that. And we'll go over those again in a couple of minutes, but I'm just going to pause and we'll see if anybody else would like to make a comment this evening. There is a comment that is in the question box. I'm going to go ahead and just read that. If the person who put it in there would like to add on to that, they can definitely do that. So this says it's from Mayor Angie Heath. The comment is, I have grave concerns that this scrubber will eliminate the odor, especially during the day. I teach at a preschool close to Crimson and have already had recess times canceled due to children throwing up due to the horrid smell. Also, my husband works nearby where they must have fresh air intake 24 hours a day in order to work in safe conditions. And they have had workers get nauseous from the smell from Crimson. If they go back to daytime and the addition of the summer heat, it worries me a lot. So thank you very much for putting that comment in the question box. We appreciate that. There's one more comment from Carol Rise, and that comment is, I also live within 1 block of Crimson. I also dread the thought of spending another summer locked in my house. The smell is nauseating and prohibits my family from enjoying sitting on the porch or enjoying any outdoor activities. So Carol, thank you so much for your comment. Give it just another minute or so to see if anyone would like to raise their hand. Lisbeth and Bob, if you guys have anybody at the library who would like to make a comment, they can do so tonight too, if they'd like to. Otherwise, we'll make sure that folks know how to submit comments in other ways in just a couple minutes. Okay, and I'm not seeing any other hands raised or any other comments. Are you okay with me closing the hearing for now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, there's a quick little statement that I need to read to folks here just to close the hearing officially, and then we'll get on to those other sort of pieces of information. So we do really want to thank you for taking time to participate in the meeting tonight. We really appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As a reminder, the public comment period will close at midnight on January 8th, 2024. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision. The hearing is now closed. Thank you again. So it was weird to say 2024. Just want to say that really quick before we get into some of this other stuff. I had to be very careful. I wanted to make sure I didn't say 2023 for you guys. So talked a little bit about how you can submit an official comment. There's a few different ways you can do that. The first way is you can send us a letter. We don't care if it's on a piece of loose leaf paper, if it's on a Post-it note, if it's on a napkin, we will take it. You just want to send that to Cindy Smith. She's our permit section manager. The address is EGLE, and it's EGLE AQD PO Box 30260. And that's in Lansing, Michigan 48909. A lot of times people will send their comments into our email public comment box. We'll share this in the follow-up email too, so don't feel like you have to write this down. And it's also on the webpage as well. We've shared it in a bunch of different spots. But that email address is EGLE-AQD-PTI public comments. So PTI public comments is all one word, and that's at michigan.gov. Or I think the easiest way sometimes is just to give us a comment verbally on our public comment voicemail. And that number is 517-284-0900. So all of this information on how to make a comment you can find online as well. And that's at michigan.gov/EGLE Air Public Notice, and EGLE Air Public Notice is all one word. So again, we will share this out. Don't feel like you have to necessarily remember all of it. And then, Caitlin, I think the next slide talks a little bit about where to find other information. So some of the things that we've talked about tonight, maybe you've seen them. I know we've shared them with folks before, but again, if you're thinking about commenting on the permit, the consent order, or that nuisance minimization plan for odors, those are all going to be on the website, either at that EGLE Air Public Notice, or maybe easier for you to remember is EGLE Crimson Holdings. So that has a little bit of the history of what we've been talking about tonight, and then links to all of this other information. So we have created information that's sort of very high level, kind of a summary. The technical fact sheet does get a lot more into the rules and regulations that Andy talked about, that our permit engineers use to review the permit application. We have those proposed terms and conditions, a summary of the enforcement action, and then that draft consent order with the nuisance minimization plan for odors. So if you're looking for that odor plan, it is on that enforcement summary report and draft consent order. It's kind of one sort of bigger document. We'll also post a link to this recording. Once it's ready, it should be in the next few days, I would say Monday at the very latest, and we'll share that out with you as well. All right, I think that, oh yes, I apologize. We've got a couple other things I want to let you know how you can contact us. So I know a lot of you have already talked to our district staff. I know some of you haven't, so you can definitely contact our district office, and we'll give you those numbers in just a second. We had some comments about, how do we get a hold of you after hours? So you can call our PEAS line. We call that our PEAS line. It's a pollution emergency alerting system. And that number is 800-292-4706. That will get you to an operator that will take your information and then pass it on to our district staff. Sometimes they will come out after hours. So we're just kind of keeping an eye on the complaints that come in. A lot of you have also really utilized our online complaint form. That is wonderful. It's really a great way for you to give us a detailed information about what you're experiencing. And we really do appreciate the folks that have used that in the past. I know, again, we talked a little bit about the fatigue that you can sometimes get when you are filling out complaints. It's bothering me. I know it feels uncomfortable and frustrating sometimes, but we really do appreciate that too. The next slide just talks a little bit about how you can contact different people that you have heard from tonight. So I'm going to just give you Andy's email address and phone. They're all on the screen. I know we don't have folks calling in tonight, so if there's a specific person on here that you want to talk to, that's great. Otherwise, if you give Andy a call, his number is 517-648-6663. He's happy to get you to the person you need to talk to or that you want to talk to. I don't want everybody to feel like they have to put all this down, but we will send out, we'll attach these slides to the follow-up email that we send. So you'll have all of these at your fingertips as well. And I think that is pretty much what we have for all of you tonight. And I do really, really appreciate everybody coming out tonight. We had a really nice turnout. Again, thank you to our interpreters. Thank you to LEAD. Thank you to the library. Please reach out to us if you have any other questions, things you want to talk about before you might make a comment. If you're looking for information and you can't find it, don't get frustrated. We're happy to help you, send you links, whatever you need for that. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and end the meeting and the hearing for tonight. And we hope to talk to all of you soon. So thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a great holiday season.